and we are uh, rolling.
There it is. How madakiapi wana hahepi kile lila daya yahipelo wopila tanka kola iuha ichichiap. This is Chase Iron Eyes on Cut to the Chase, episode number 5. I greet you all as friends, and I want to welcome you. This evening, I'm broadcasting from the heart of Lakota country, the Republic of Lakota, and this is our weekly broadcast. Part news, part analysis, part amazing. Somebody tell my mom on Standing Rock, I'm doing the news. I'm doing the news, Mom. It's also a chance here on Cut to the Chase to dive a little deeper into the lives of Indian country legends, scholars, treaty defenders, sovereignty defenders, land and sacred sites proponents, grassroots advocates, academics, authors, everyone in between, in the Indigenous world and outside of our world as well. I welcome you to access the perspectives here, the Indigenous authorities on mainstream issues of politics, socioeconomics, spirituality, and anything worth discussing. I don't like to wait for mainstream to call us because, as you know, when we didn't determine our own agency for the longest time, so we only got the calls to be on mainstream media every time Whitey dressed up as an Indian for Halloween, or every time some gaslighting teacher had Indigenous kids reenact the fake first Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, leaving out the Wampanoag and Pequot massacres, or when the Redskins or the Chiefs, we had to wait until they made it to the Super Bowl, till we start getting the calls about Indian mascots. We had to wait to become relevant when all those mainstreamers would then look for their native to come onto their platforms and, for a limited time and a limited scope. And that's fine. I'm a part of that scrum as well. But Cut to the Chase is where we can say what we mean all the time. Well, at least for once a week. For now, that's what we can commit to. And tonight we have one of the main organizers who's standing strong to bring justice for all those working for big corporations like Amazon. This brother, his name is Chris Smalls. He hosts his own podcast called It's a Smalls World. He's a member of the People's Party, the Movement for a People's Party. He's a solid brother that I had the good fortune of crossing paths with. After that, we'll spend some time with Bill Means. He was supposed to be on last show, and hopefully he can make it this time. And I do apologize for starting a little bit late. We wanted to make sure everybody was ready to go in the showroom. But we want to catch up with Bill Means of the International Indian Treaty Council. And we also have Andrea Carmen, a good friend of mine, a mentor, and the executive director of the International Indian Treaty Council, as well as playing significant roles and holding significant posts within the United Nations. But this is going to be a beast of a show, and I want to speak about Amazon first. As you know, Amazon is led by none other than Jeff Bezos, the world's first trillionaire, or projected to be the world's first trillionaire. I don't know how many lifetimes it would take to spend $1 trillion. Who knows? That's 15 zeros, I believe. But the fact that we as a human species sit at this juncture when we are celebrating people like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Bill Gates or whoever, we should not be celebrating billionaires. But here we are. And we are very concerned for workers' rights, for sustainable economies, making sure that we tax the rich so they pay their fair share. That's all we really want. We don't want Trump to be able to escape paying $750 in annual income tax. But no matter what your political affiliation, we all need to be concerned about Amazon, owned by this brother right here, the world's first trillionaire. I can't say that enough times, but Bezos is actively suppressing union formation. He is a union buster, and like he's a buster as well. But like tonight, we're able to be joined by Chris Smalls, who's been standing up to this mega corporation worth the gross domestic product of some small countries, perhaps some regular sized countries as well. But later in a bit here, we'll take a look at this video that Amazon, I don't know, they published this video to their employees, but Amazon is so large that they have their own orbit. I mean, cities and states court them to come to their area. They offer to waive taxes for the ultra rich again. I mean, what do you know? We, the working class, always get taxed. Like, we don't have a choice. We don't ever catch a break there. If Amazon comes to our area, then we're trading labor and we're paying taxes. Some cities negotiate saying you can only come here on our terms, and that's a good thing. And we have one of those kind of leaders, an organizer who I'd like to bring on to the show so we can have a conversation with him about what he's been up to. Again, this is Chris Smalls from It's a Smalls World podcast. His Twitter handle is shut_down Amazon. But before he joins us, I want to show this video that is designed for Amazon employees. Control, if we could roll that video, please.
We are not anti-union, but we are not neutral either. We will boldly defend our direct relationship with associates as best for the associate, the business, and our shareholders. We do not believe unions are in the best interest of our customers, our shareholders, or most importantly, our associates. Our business model is built upon speed, innovation, and customer obsession, things that are generally not associated with unions. When we lose sight of those critical focus areas, we jeopardize everyone's job security. We don't badmouth unions in general, but we will speak openly with associates about unions, including any specific concerns about particular unions involved in organizing. And we share our preference for a direct working relationship frequently and boldly, even when no organizing activity has occurred. You will learn about the warning signs most commonly associated with early union organizing, as well as other warning signs that could indicate associate disengagement, vulnerability to organizing, or early organizing activity. While employees have the right to organize, we have a right and responsibility to share our position that a direct working relationship is better for the customer, the company, and the associate. In order to be able to do that effectively, it is critical that we recognize the early warning signs of potential organizing and escalate concerns promptly. If you see warning signs of potential organizing, notify your building HRM and GM site leader immediately. HRMs and GM site leaders should notify their assigned ER managers or ER principal immediately. The most obvious signs would include use of words associated with unions or union-led movements like living wage or steward, petitions or other concerted activity such as an associate purporting to speak on behalf of his or her coworkers when raising concerns, union graffiti, union t-shirts, hats, jackets, or other clothing, union flyers, and union visitors in or near the parking lot. Some signs are less obvious than finding the actual union flyer, but they can still indicate associate disengagement, which is...
You can cut that. Chris Smalls, welcome to the show. I don't know if that video is real. It seems like we're watching The Onion or something like that. I don't know if that video is...
It's real.
Is that video real?
It's real. I can tell you, I was a part of that machine for 4.5 years, so it's real.
Wow. You know? Warning signs? A living wage as a warning sign. So everybody who's listening in, and thank you all for tuning in every single week. I really do appreciate it. This brother right here, his name is Chris Smalls. Chris, if you could just introduce yourself to our listeners. You know, we are very concerned about workers' rights, and I love what you're doing, bro. So thank you for joining the show tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name's Chris Smalls, former Amazon employee. I worked at the company started in 2015. My last day of employment was last year, March 30th, 2020. Now I'm the founder of TCLVW, the Congress of Essential Workers. I've been fighting the good fight all across the nation for throughout the duration of the entire pandemic. We traveled the country protesting in front of Jeff Bezos' mansions. And we continue to advocate. We just was down in Alabama with the workers of Bessemer a couple weeks ago. And now we stand in solidarity with all essential workers, especially Amazon workers now. We're still fighting this fight. And I'm happy to be here.
What was thank you for that. I did not hear of the Congress of Essential Workers, but what was going down in Alabama? Like, what is kind of the update on union formation? And if you could just, a lot of our audience might not be aware, because I wasn't aware of what you were doing until Movement for a People's Party. That's where I kind of first came into contact with you. And
right.
I was able to find out through the New York Times article that you were demanding basic PPE when COVID first started. If you could just take us through a little bit of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, last year about this time, in my former facility, I started seeing workers get sick one by one because we were unprotected. We had no PPE, no facial masks, no cleaning supplies, nothing. There was just no guidelines, no enforcement. It was business as usual. Actually, I just shared a tweet on my actual Twitter page of exactly what we were doing 1 year ago. We were actually holding parties in the middle of the pandemic, full-blown parties, popcorn machine, DJs, disregard for the virus, and any type of social distancing, forget about it. So as a supervisor, I was seeing employees get sick one by one, and I felt I needed to do something. I tried to go through the proper channels at first. After spending several weeks of going through HR, and then a week of organizing workers in the cafeteria for 10 hours a day, telling them the truth about the fact that, management did not want me to tell them that there was positive cases in the building. They decided to quarantine me after I held the protest on March 30th. Before I held the protest. They wanted to quarantine me on March 28th, which forced me to hold the protest on March 30th. 2 hours after the protest, I was fired over the phone for what they claim I violated quarantine policy that I'd never seen. So it was that was really what catapulted me into the media. Then a week later, Jeff Bezos himself held a meeting with his top general counsel, David Sapolsky, calling me not smart or articulate to ironically make me the face of the whole union organizing efforts against Amazon. So from that moment forward, that's when I founded the organization, TCLVW, and we traveled the country, going to every single Jeff Bezos mansion that we can at least find on Google, and protesting. We protested in New York City, Washington, D.C., Beverly Hills, that has a $165 million mansion. And then we went to Seattle, Washington, to the Amazon headquarters. And then our last trip was Alabama 2 weeks ago.
$169 mansion.
Million. 65 million.
169 million. Sorry. Yeah. It just kind of goes without saying. A million. So I remember that. I remember seeing this story about them calling you inarticulate. I mean, isn't that crazy that whenever we speak good, they call us articulate, but they went out of their way to attack you personally. Now, what's it like working for Amazon? I've never known any of my friends or relatives. I mean, what were you getting paid there, and what was a typical day like there?
Oof. So when I first got hired back in 2015, I was getting paid $12.75. I came in entry level, but I got promoted up to a supervisor in less than a year, and I was a supervisor for the last 4 years at the company. And I opened up 3 buildings for them. New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So New Jersey was my first building, EWR9 in Carteret. Then Connecticut was my second one, BDL2, and then JFK Staten Island was my last building. And every building was the same. It was a machine, and that's how they treat you. You're treated. You're nothing but a number to them. I used to tell my new hires, when you come in, if you have a gym membership, you might want to cancel it because this is 10 hours, 12 hours of calisthenics. These buildings are massive. They're almost 1 million square feet, some of them over 1 million square feet long, the size of 14 NFL football fields. You probably walk 30 to 60 miles a day, so that's what it was. That's the reality of it. A lot of it felt like solitary confinement, because you don't see
Wow.
the day. You don't see the light of day. You on the morning shift, you go to work real early in the morning, crack of dawn, and then when you leave work, it's the evening time. So you imagine you're losing half the day with your family, your loved ones. That was my lifestyle for the last 5 years almost. And as far as my pay, yeah, I worked for the richest man in the world, and I was capped out at $25 an hour when they fired me. So
Wow.
that's the highest paid, and JFK Staten Island is one of the highest paid facilities. So those workers there, they actually have a cap. There's a cap nationwide, network wide, but my cap was $25. I couldn't get any more raises after that.
Wow, thank you for that. I did not know those facilities were that enormous. One of our listeners said that Jeff Bezos makes enough to give each employee, and I don't know how many employees there are nationwide or worldwide, but $800,000 bonus, bro. So,
yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the Congress of Essential Workers? Where can we find that online, and what are you guys up to over the next month or two?
Yeah, absolutely. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at TCOEW. You can follow us on there. And what we're up to, actually, we're still in solidarity with the workers of Alabama. So, actually, on March 20th, our next demonstration will be in New York City in Harlem. We're going to be on 125th and Malcolm X protesting. I think we're going to march to the Whole Foods and show solidarity with the workers, with the other organizations that's putting this on. I'm just now announcing it now, so you guys are hearing it for the first time, which is great, to this audience. And yeah, we're going to be in solidarity with the workers of Alabama all the way until the vote is over. The vote is over on March 29th, which is actually the day before I was terminated last year. So actually on the 1 year anniversary, March 30th this year, we're going to be protesting again outside of my former facility. So if you're in the New York area, please join us on the ground if you can in solidarity, because it's all right now we're focusing on the vote of Alabama, which is probably the most important vote since the 1930s.
Wow. All right, we'll use the best of our networks to co-promote what you're doing, because that frontline activism, that advocacy, like we support that. That's the only thing that really makes progress. So before you bounce out, Chris, because I'm gonna let you go, are there any updates that you want to leave us with? Anything that you want to part ways with us? But you're more than welcome to come on anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to work. I want everybody to support the Alabama workers right now. That's what everybody's focus should be. Once again, this union vote is the most important vote since the 1930s, since the Great Depression. The diminishing of unions for the last 40, 50 years in this country. We have an opportunity right now to see another uprising. So support the workers. Stand in solidarity with us if you're able body, and follow our social media again at TCOEW, the Congress of Essential Workers. Check me out on our podcast, It's a Smalls World. Every week we drop new content. We bring on new guests. So Chase, I would like to have you on, 1 week when you're available. Also have you on my show as well. And you can follow me on Twitter at @shut_down Amazon.
All right, you got that, brother. Thank you again for doing what you do, and stay strong out there.
Absolutely,
nice to have you on, brother.
Solidarity.
Again, huge thanks to Chris Smalls. Worker solidarity, always. That's very much a part of the struggle for Mother Earth liberation and a just transition, with complete regard for workers' rights. It's not that we don't like oil pipeline workers as human beings, but we think they should be building biodiesel pipelines or water pipelines, perhaps, to Indian country. Those workers' rights, the working people of the world need healthcare, Medicare for all, student loan forgiveness. Even if you're trading your intellect, I mean, I'm buried in student loan debt right now. So I'm waiting out on that. They're gonna have to come to Pine Ridge to hunt me down to try to get any student loan money out of me. Minimum wage, $15 minimum wage at least. It sounds like, just listening to Chris Smalls there, it sounds like a lot of the frontline workers are fighting to even be considered frontline workers, and just for basic human rights, workers' rights. And at the same time, it seems like we're always bailing out the rich or the ultra rich. But part of this struggle is the fight for indigenous sovereignty, in giving ourselves to fulfill the land back prophecy. And to make up for last week, I don't know if we have Bill Means on, but let us do a quick check with control. Do we got, is Bill Means? Okay, he's Bill is not able to join us right now, but there is another woman, like I mentioned before. Her name is Andrea Carmen. She's currently the executive director of International Indian Treaty Council. And International Indian Treaty Council has been around since 1974. And like I said, Andrea holds significant posts with the United Nations. But before we bring her in, Control, if we could run a clip of an interview that we did with Andrea 2 years ago, a little bit over 2 years ago.
I think that we still are in a survival mode, but it's changing. There is restoration of a sovereign perspective that we can hear in the room, you know, the Ochete Sakoan meetings saying, okay, let's take a step back from that dependent relationship that is part of genocide with the federal government, where we think that everything that we're doing has to be defined by federal law. Our very identity is defined by federal law. You know, we're not independent treaty nations. We're in a trust relationship with the United States government that we have to, you know, preserve and keep alive. That's changing, and we see it changing. And I think there's a lot of interest, and Standing Rock showed it. It proved it. A lot of renewed interest, a revitalization coming from the youth and the young people, and seeking the elders out and say, well, tell us about the treaties. What does that mean? Not just what it says on paper, but what is that relationship of equal sovereigns, of equal recognition. One thing we've been talking about here is setting up a system for addressing treaty violations that is not just in the courts of one party, the violating party. You know, it's an old saying, you can't be party to a dispute and the arbitrator of the dispute. So I learned that in Ecuador when I was a human rights observer. You know, the indigenous peoples understood that there really clearly, that it has to be bilateral, the decision of how we're going to resolve these issues. This is what the UN Treaty Study called for back in 1999. Miguel Alfonso Martinez talked about a new jurisdiction that would be equally participatory between both of the treaty partners. How do we resolve this violation? And when we got the OAS American Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples adopted, it went one step further than Article 37 of the UN Declaration. It said that there needs to be an international oversight body set up to resolve treaty violations that can't be resolved between the parties. But we recognize that that mechanism to resolve treaty violations between the parties has never existed. The courts, including the United States Supreme Court, is not that body. That is the body of one party, the violating party.
Wow, I agree with that. Thank you for that, Andrea. That was time just flies. You know, it just seems like yesterday I met you in New York at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and so I want to welcome you to our show. It's a great honor to know you, to have you on the show. Thanks for being here. If you could just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your post with the United Nations, because I understand those the least.
Okay, really nice to see you, Chase, and greetings, Chokweotesia, Leosim Chaniabo, Mawayim. Greetings to all my relatives who are listening in. And I think this is my first time on a podcast, so you know the technology is moving ahead, and us. Kind of, I don't know if we want to call old dogs or the old guard or are trying to catch up all the time. We need the guidance of our young folks, you know, all the time on these kinds of new technologies, new mediums. But the good thing is it's a way of reaching each other and talking to each other, especially, you know, during this last year with the pandemic. We've started doing almost weekly webinars, bringing Indigenous peoples together that way, and you know, having people tune in from really literally all over the world to share with each other, you know, through the computer. You know, we're still working on getting our real elders to, you know, accept this way of communicating. I don't know if they ever really will, but I do appreciate. I'm from the Yaqui Indigenous Nation, which is cut in two by the international border where it exists today between Mexico and the United States. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. We have a reservation here, the Pasco Yaqui tribe, and we also have our treaty territory in northern Mexico, where the Yaquis are the only indigenous nation that has a treaty with the government of Mexico. It was signed in 1939 to end our armed conflict that had been going on about 400 years, first with the Spanish and then with the Mexicans. So we have a large land base and we have 8 traditional governments there, very similar to the Ochete Sacoan. We have, my grandmother's from Vicam Pueblo, which is, I guess you could say, the lead political pueblo or tribe for the Yaqui Nation, the spokespersons. And Vicam means, and so that's my clan, it means the tip of the arrowhead, not just the arrowhead, but the very tip of the arrowhead is my clan in the Yaqui Nation. I started working with the International Indian Treaty Council as a student intern. I was a student at UC Santa Cruz, University of California, and we formed an organization called CASA, Coalition Against Sterilization Abuse, and we were working through the Women's Studies Department at UC Santa Cruz. And it was just coming out then, the Connie Uri study, the work of Senator Alvarez, which began to highlight that there was actually a program by the United States government being carried out in Indian Health Service hospitals, Rocky Boy, Claremore, Oklahoma, you know, all over the place, to actually sterilize Indigenous women without their knowledge or consent. And we were the first organization around that back in 1976. And our faculty advisor was the late, great Lehman Brightman. And he was the one who introduced me to Bill Wapipa at the Stanford powwow.
Wow!
And I met also the women from Women of All Red Nations who were in the Bay Area in Oakland, and that's how I started working with IITC as a student intern around the issue of forced sterilization. And you know, they say, well, that's a really important women's issue. We said, no, it's a genocide issue.
Wow, man.
Any kind of destruction of our ability to have healthy children and have children at all is an issue of genocide. It's a textbook case of genocide. So that's how I started working with IITC, and I became a staff person in 1983. And Bill Means, who we're waiting for here today, who was, you know, one of the co-founders of IITC and continued as the president of the board, talked me into accepting the position of executive director for 6 months interim. And that was in 1992. So you can see how you Lakotas are.
You know what? I have never.
Go ahead.
I haven't heard that history about Lehman Brightman and Bill Wapipa. Those are other, you know, when we're raised in this culture, and you can call it struggle culture, but it's just the fight for our basic human dignity. We can also be very rhetorical and call it the struggle for indigenous liberation, Mother Earth liberation. All of that stuff takes many forms, and I don't, this sort of history just isn't out there for us to go pick up a book and read about. So it's really good to have people like you who can come on and just talk about it in a general sense, because it's your lived history. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier the FCCC. Now, I don't know what that is, but it's inside something inside the United Nations. Could you kind of just tell us what that is and what your role is there?
Sure. Well, everybody knows there as well as here in the desert. Last year, the summer was the hottest and driest summer ever recorded in the history of Tucson, Arizona, since they've been keeping weather here. And you know, Tucson is already hot and dry. So we depend on those late summer rains. They call them the monsoon rains because they come so hard, but they water, you know, the squash and the beans and the things that we're growing, you know, for our food. They didn't even come this year. And we're talking about the climate crisis, probably a longer standing and maybe eventually more urgent crisis than we're even seeing with the pandemic. And there is a connection between those two. But International and Treaty Council has been working for about 15 years in one of the UN bodies where there's a legally binding convention. And everyone's heard now of the Paris Agreement because Trump was the one pulled out of it and Biden talked a lot about rejoining it, which he had. That was adopted out of the 21st Conference of the Parties. They call it the COP, Conference of the Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And that took place in Paris, is why they call it the Paris Agreement. And the countries at that time made a commitment that's legally binding. This is a treaty, a convention, to actively reduce greenhouse gases. And this work has been going on since 1992. And Indigenous peoples really had to force our way into this process. You know, I have pictures of protests in 2009 in Copenhagen and 2010 in Cancun, Mexico, where we're demanding a voice because the scientists began to say Indigenous peoples were on the front line, were the most affected. In many places, we're even losing our land base, you know, in the Pacific Islands and coastal communities in Alaska, falling into the ocean, you know, Indigenous communities being forced off their land as climate refugees. There's more environmental refugees in the world today than there are from any kind of war or conflict. And this is just the beginning. So we pushed our way in there. We weren't even allowed while the Paris Agreement was being negotiated inside the hall of negotiation. But we had about 200 Indigenous peoples there, and we were able, you know, by our usual hard-headed attitude at the UN, like everywhere else, to demand a voice, and our rights were finally recognized in the preamble of the Paris Agreement, but also our traditional knowledge was finally recognized formally. And there was a call in the Paris Agreement for the creation of a platform so that Indigenous peoples finally would have a formal seat and be able to, with our consent, decide if we want to share our knowledge about why the earth is in such crisis and some of the solutions, like stop fossil fuel production and use, stop those pipelines. You know, it's not just a matter of defending our land, defending our rights, our sacred places, our water. It's about the planet at risk. The UN says 1 million species are actually threatened with extinction today. And many of those are species, say like the salmon runs in on the Pacific coast, and many others that are essential food and culturally important foods for Indigenous peoples. But also, we know that if our elders left us the prophecies about what would happen if humans didn't respect the earth, we all have those. They also left us the solution, and that's going back to our traditional food systems, bringing back the buffalo, for example. You know, I heard the president, Irvin Collison from Blackfeet, talk about, you know, all the Intertribal Buffalo Council. There's about 70 tribes now restoring what was destroyed as an act of war against, you know, the Plains Indians. But it just so happens that those buffalo don't tear up the roots of the plants, of the grasses and stuff like cows do. So it holds the soil, you know, that all that dust bowl that happened in the 30s was because of plowing, but also because of cattle. They killed the buffalo, you know. So all of that is bringing back our local foods, our traditional foods, our original seeds that are drought resistant, getting rid of those genetically modified seeds and pesticides. Coming back to our original ways is really the salvation for Indigenous peoples. And if we choose to share that information at the UN, which we may need to do to stop them from destroying all of us, you know, them as well as us, now we have a platform to do it. So I was selected by North America Indigenous peoples to be the North America representative on this new body called the Facilitative Working Group for Local Communities Indigenous Peoples Platform. Excuse the long names. That's how the UN is. If I use the initials, you won't know what I'm talking about. That's why they use all those initials, because the names are so long. So and then this year I got selected by all the Indigenous members. There's 7 of us from the 7 regions as to be the co-chair. And my other co-chair from the countries from the states is he's an Indigenous person too, but he's represents the small island states of the Pacific Islands who are under incredible threat from this. And we're talking about now putting in safeguards for protecting our knowledge and practices. Before we even think about sharing anything, we have to have rights like free, prior, informed consent in order to protect our knowledge and decide for ourselves what can be shared, what should be shared, you know. But we want to see a change in their behavior first before we come to the table and start talking about a new way of doing things. We need them to stop the fossil fuel addiction that's created most of this problem. So that's part of our demand in this process. And they're listening because they're scared. You know that, Chase? We said, why suddenly are they listening to Indigenous peoples? Why do they make a place for us at the table after all our, you know, protests and 20 years of demands? It's because they're scared and they know that their lives are on the line too. And they're turning to us as usual for a last resort. You know,
it seems like definitely people are waking up, because we all recognize, especially since Standing Rock, the words Mini-Wichoni, water is life, are part of the global lexicon now. But I want to go back to something you mentioned, and that is first about land use, regenerative, renewable, sustainable, Indigenous land use practices. You're absolutely right. We as tribal nations have the ability to create these micro economies just on a smaller scale. If we were to favor buffalo ranching over cattle ranching, our rivers, creeks, and streams would be healthy. If we were to have a land use that wasn't fences and highways creating land, it just doesn't look like, that's not what our ancestors knew. This place, the Northern Plains, was full of 6 feet tall buffalo grass. And I want to talk about, I just want to recognize and thank you for bringing that up about land use. That's something that tribal nations need to be taking the lead on, because the world is looking to Indigenous peoples. But you mentioned free, prior, and informed consent. And in your role with the United Nations, I believe it was with human rights, President Trump, when he was the president, came out to the Black Hills and wanted to have a fireworks show. As a result of this, there was a peaceful resistance to force this country to recognize Indigenous treaty rights. Now, Nick Tilson is still facing charges for that day. I believe he's facing 17 years in South Dakota prison for a nonviolent event of resistance. And I would like you to weigh in on what you might have. You did something that you called for his human rights to be recognized. Control, if you could put that graphic up, Andrea, if you could just weigh in on that.
Sure. One thing we've learned how to do through the years is to use that UN system to force the countries to pay attention to the violation of our rights. That's why Treaty Council was established back in 1974. There was no justice for Indigenous people and nations, not just in the United States, but in any colonial state in the entire America. So this was something that we wanted to do. First of all, we put in an urgent action saying that the real violators here of their own law, because as we know, the United States ratified the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty and the 1851 Treaty. And the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty says that no one can come on from outside onto the treaty lands of the Great Sioux Nation or Ochete without consent. Free, prior, and informed consent is affirmed in the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples in a lot of different articles. But the first legal recognition of consent was in those treaties, the treaties with the Great Sioux Nation. So it's the United States government that was illegally entering Ochete territory. It wasn't Nick Tilson and the Indian Collective and Oglala Lakota Nation and the other nations that blockaded that road. Not only that, they were protecting their right to health because they were in the middle of a pandemic, having thousands of people come in with no masks and, no social distancing. And the third thing, they were violating a sacred site that's now called Mount Rushmore, but is a sacred place. So we took all of that to the United Nations Special Rapporteur, which is a human rights investigator on the rights of Indigenous peoples, also human rights defenders, the Rapporteur on cultural and religious freedom rights, and the Rapporteur on peaceful assembly. And at the end of the day, back in December, we got a really strong result calling on the United States. We're waiting, for the result now with all of this transition to the new administration. We're hoping for some good results to call for all the charges against Nick Tilson to be dropped. But even beyond that, the UN Rapporteur document, and it's on our website if people want to see it, actually called for what we were just talking about before, what I was talking about in that video, for a process to be set up through not Department of Justice or Interior, but the United States State Department that deals with international relations with the Ochete to talk about how treaty violations are going to be violated going forward. So this is something that Bill Means, who will be on in a minute, and International Treaty Council have been calling for more than 40 years. And that was what the UN Treaty Study called for, that a new process be set up to have an equal discussion between equal sovereigns, treaty partners, in this case, the Ochete and the United States government, to decide, okay, how are we going to resolve these issues? How are the treaties going to be upheld? And if that doesn't result in satisfactory outcome for either party, we need to then go to an international arena to set up a process for that to be adjudicated. The courts, like I said in the video, are not the right place for a bilateral process to happen. But we got that call for as a result of Nick's case, and the international work that we've done to support that action and to support justice and defense for Nick Tilson as a human rights defender, but to support the entire nation for their just demands that their treaties be honored and implemented and respected by the United States treaty partner. So that was part of the result, and people can see that. We came out with a press release. I think I sent it to you, that links to the statement by the UN human rights experts. So we were able to utilize this situation to bring international attention to the ongoing violation of the treaties and how that's an ongoing human rights violation.
Thank you for that. There's a stark difference between free, prior, and informed consent and consultation. I did just see Bill Means popped on. He's back out again. I don't know what happened there, but the audience, you should know that Bill Means is making every last effort to join us here, and we very much want him to. So I would like to, Andrea, you live by the border. I didn't know about the GMO struggles, the GMO concerns that were going down in your part of Turtle Island until you had briefed me on them. And so if there are any issues that you'd like to talk about as far as what the GMO debacle looks like, perhaps the indigenous children who have a right to traverse those borders, who are now in cages, or maybe the border wall, perhaps, just issues that are particular to your part of the country. I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about that.
Well, as one of our leaders stated, the land is ours, but the border and the wall is theirs. And just down the road here on Tono O'odham, sacred land, one of the things that Trump was able to, accelerate, partly because of the pandemic, is the construction of a piece of border wall that happened to destroy some Tono O'odham burial grounds and a sacred spring that had been there since time immemorial. And we're in the desert, so springs are more than precious to us. Everyone loves their water and protects their water, but here in the desert, it's an especially grave concern when things like that happen. And and those kinds of things, just like a mine, you can't reclaim it. How do you restore it? Is there really justice, that is possible in those situations? So I think, there are many human rights violations, and along the border, we actually did another UN case to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. It's a treaty body, legally binding. But guess which is the only country in the world that has not ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child? Just guess, Chase. See if you can guess. Take a wild guess.
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
I said, guess which country in the world has not ratified, the only country in the world that has not ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child?
Wow.
Guess.
It's either the United States, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand.
Those are the four that voted against the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. It's the United States of America. But we did take the case nevertheless, relating to the children in cages and state-sponsored child abuse of Indigenous children. And we just had a meeting with some folks here, Mayan Indians that live in Tucson, Arizona, and they said at least 25% of the children crossing the border do not speak Spanish. They speak only an Indigenous language, and about that many or more of the adults. So how can they sign agreements or participate in any kind of way to explain why they're fleeing their homeland, with violence or, economic trauma or the different things they're going through, But these are full-blooded language-speaking Indigenous peoples that don't even speak the colonial language, and there's no services for them whatsoever. So this is an issue that we're taking to the UN Special Rapporteur on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Francisco Calitzai, who himself is a Mayan Indian from Guatemala, because this is another example of human rights violations in the way that Indigenous peoples are being treated or mistreated. I should say there are so many examples that we're working on and trying to advance respect, for example, for Indigenous women facing environmental violence through the international traffic of things like pesticides and mercury, but also extractive industries, both in the United States and in Latin America, utilize sexual violence against Indigenous women as a way to clear communities away when they want to make a mine. And we're looking at an important case now affecting 11 Mayan Indian women that were forcibly relocated due to a Canadian mining company, gold mining company, but the security guards used rape as a way of terrorizing the community and breaking the resistance. And these 11 Mayan Indian women went to Canada, and with support of some organizations, actually got that case accepted in Canadian court against a Canadian mining company. It's really a first time. It's a ground breaker and a game changer. If we can take those corporations into legal processes for the human rights violations. And then, of course, they say, well, it was a subsidiary, it was some security guards. No, it's them. It's the multinational corporations that are using environmental violence. And even the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women around the extractive industries, even in North Dakota on the border with Minnesota and Canada. And of course, here on the border that, we're sitting near, these are all issues that the International Indian Treaty Council is addressing, giving a voice to those that have always been marginalized and deserve to have their rights be heard about and the violations be redressed by competent international authorities if we can't get justice on the national level. So we're still kind of doing the same thing that IATC was set up to do all the way back in 1974. We haven't changed. We've just kind of expanded the Indigenous peoples that are affiliates and that work with us. And, there's always work to do if you're working on human rights violations against Indigenous peoples. But I see that Bill's on now. Maybe you want to
let's
bring him
definitely. If Bill, thank you for sticking with it. Can you hear us? Hold on, Bill might not be able to. We'll see if he can get this. Whoa. So. You know what? I have not. It was through meeting you in 2012, Andrea, that I first kind of realized the privilege that we have as Indigenous peoples in what is now called the United States. I mean, we can speak freely, we can advocate, we can step out onto the front line, we can do whatever we need to do without worrying about being killed. But I never had the opportunity to recognize the gravity of our struggle for human dignity until I met some of the people that you work with, some of the people that we all have the responsibility to share their struggles. And I don't want to name them on air, but I want to thank you for your work in that arena. And I know that your work stretches across these colonial borders. But I want to thank you for that. And so, Bill, it will give you another chance to join the discussion here. Can you hear us?
Hold a thumb up if you can hear us. Hold a thumb up if you can hear us.
Put your thumb up, Bill, if you can hear us.
He's got to turn on his mute. He's got to unmute his microphone.
Oh, he's texting us. Hold on here, audience. We really do. Whoa. Hold on for a second here.
You're getting close. You need to push your test your.
text him to click on the unmute button.
I think he might be able to hear us. And for the listening audience, thank you for bearing with us. We just this is the second time we try to get Lekshi Bill Means on, and it's really important. We want to get him on, but we're just having some technical issues here. And thank you,
Standing
Andrea,
right there.
for there he
Hello?
is. Bill.
Hello?
Hey, yo. Can you
Can
hear
you
us?
hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear Chuck, but hello?
Bill, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All
I
right.
hear
Well,
you.
we wanted to just give you an opportunity. We missed you last week when we were talking about the siege at Wounded Knee, and everything that had gone down from there. And before I would say let's roll in a video of an interview that you did in 1983, but I don't want to lose you, and so what I'd rather do is have you weigh in on what you think the impact is from that time, the siege of Wounded Knee, to Standing Rock and No Dapple. Like, how do you see the struggle for indigenous sovereignty, indigenous liberation? How is that? What does that mean to you today? 48 years since Wounded Knee 2.
Well, it's very different these days. Back in the 60s, 70s, there was no such thing as accepting the status quo because there are many movements that were working throughout society against racism, for social change, for self-determination. And so we experienced, should we say, solidarity with people like the Black Panthers, the United Farm Workers, the Texas Farm Workers, the Chicano community in Denver. And so we had our friends on the north side of Minneapolis called the North Side Children's Program. So these are things where we started out in solidarity and learning and teaching these type of movements about who we were as Indian people. And I think we initially picked out the 4 greatest enemies of Indian people to do our work, to narrow it into some kind of organization and movement. And people don't realize that AIM wasn't just a fly-by-night organization. We organized years to accomplish the things we did. For example, we took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs building in Washington, D.C., 1972. Well, the movement started in 1968, was the founding date. So in between that time, we began to focus on 4 areas, which was the churches, what they've done to our culture and language. We focused also on education because of the fact that what education has done to kill the Indian. Kill the Indian, save the man. Policies that American education was built on. We also identified the corporations for their grab of our land and the development of resources, the entire, especially the people looking for various minerals, the mining companies. These are the ones we focus on. And also, we focused on the Bureau of Indian Affairs to abolish that organization because they're the most inefficient bureaucracy in the Department of Interior and indeed the United States government. At that time, they were spending $3 billion a year on Indian affairs, but yet 80% of that money went to the various salaries and overhead, our indirect costs, our direct costs of the programs. And so what trickled down to the reservation was 10% divided by 500 and some tribes. So this is a type of delusion that was created that they were taking care of the Indians when in fact they're only taking care of themselves and creating salaries and no accountability or no what you might call measurable goals. So we did all these things, but we organized for a long time, man. That's about between 72 and 68. That's 4 years. And we built a lot of chapters in many different reservations. For example, in Porcupine, we had one of the first, the first in South Dakota. And, we use different organizing methods, which is those days, because of the fact the whole progressive world was doing something. You used to have a saying, do something even if it's wrong. And so this is a type, we had some organizing going on from a traditional perspective. For the first time, instead of Robert's Rules of Order, we started Porcupine Aim with a Friday night owl dance. That's what we organized as American Indian Movement. And so at that time, there are very few singers that knew those type of songs and knew that type of ceremony that goes with that. So we introduced the drum and our culture into the movement. And of course, the first Friday night, very few kids came. It built up to where we had over 100 people that came to the AIM chapter meetings in Porcupine. And then we began to get involved in several actions like Raymond Yellow Thunder on a border town of Gordon, Nebraska, where we were successful in taking over the town because Raymond Yellow Thunder was killed there and nothing was being done. He was dragged, and we found out through our subsequent investigation that he was dragged into the American Legion Club and made to dance Indian while they burned the bottom of his feet. And then they dragged him outside and they found him 3 days later in the trunk of a car dead. And so he was our first, should we say, martyr, our first person who signified to us or who was the example of the treatment that Indian people got in these border towns. So that was our first attack, was against racism. And half the reservation came with us on a caravan to Gordon, Nebraska. Long story short, we even got our AIM song out of there. So
wow,
that's just one of the events that really started to, yeah.
We want to just stay with us. Hopefully you can hear us. It seems like you have a good connection, but we want to ask the control room to show a video of an interview of the not so distant past, because you mentioned Raymond Yellow Thunder, rest in power to Lexi Raymond. But control, if you could roll that video and just check this out, Lexi Bill.
It was June of 1972. A man by the name of Raymond Yellow Thunder was killed in a border town near the Pine Ridge Reservation, a place called Gordon, Nebraska. And so after his family went to the Civil Rights Department, to the Congressman, to the Senate, to the Justice Department, to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Police, to the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, all the so-called protectors of Indian people. They then came back to what we call a court of last resort. The American Indian Movement was having a meeting in Omaha, Nebraska. And Siebert Youngbear from Porcupine, who is related to Raymond Yellow Thunder, came to Omaha and asked us to help because they had exhausted all their efforts to find help. And so we held a meeting and AIM decided to come to Gordon. Or to make matters more simple, another meeting was held in Pine Ridge in which almost the whole reservation turned out, because remember, over the years almost every Indian family had experienced some kind of prejudice or racism in the city of Gordon, Nebraska. They used to have signs up there in the 1950s and early 60s which said no dogs or Indians allowed. This is the type of community that we're talking about. And so everybody turned out because AIM was new, because they were sick and tired of racism, they were sick and tired of discrimination, and more importantly, they weren't going to allow this white community to go unpunished for killing an Indian anymore. And so we caravaned from Pine Ridge to Gordon, Nebraska. We confronted the town and charges were brought against the perpetrators against Raymond Yellow Thunder. Hare Brothers was their name. They were sent to prison for 2 years or a year and a half. But that was a unity created 9 months prior to Wounded Knee. And that's what made the American Indian movement very popular. A people's movement, a people's organization here on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Because for the first time in the history of this reservation, after the BIA had failed, after the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, the congressmen, after everybody had failed, it was AIM who had actually done something to help this family on such a difficult problem as addressing the situation of racism.
Wow. Lexi Bill, hopefully you could hear that, and thank you for joining us tonight. It's really, it's an honor, truly, to have you here with us and be able to tell us about what you've been through, what you lived through. So I do want to give you the opportunity to talk about the formation of International Indian Treaty Council, working with Fool's Crow, Yellow Thunder Camp, anything that you'd like to share with us. Just what you shared from Alcatraz to the Trail of Broken Treaties, to the BIA takeover, to the occupation at Wounded Knee. That is, those are actions and sacrifices that have put us in a position to be happy and dignified with what we are and who we are. So I would like to give you the opportunity to speak to some of that.
Oh,
Hold on, you might be on mute, Lexi.
you gotta click his audio button again. Oh, we still can't hear you. Oh. Just tell him to find that audio button.
Lexi, we can't hear you. The audio button on your phone or your computer might be.
Hold on, let's give it just a second.
Hold on here, audience. We want to give Lexi Bill some time to jump back on. We put in far too much effort to bring you Bill Means. But thank you for joining. He can hear us. Bill can hear us.
Right, so tell him again, he's got a mute button somewhere.
There's a mute button somewhere there, Lexi. All right.
We're gonna get him back on.
Yeah, we're gonna have, this is a sign that we're gonna have to bring you back, Lexi. So control, if we could just cut to the chase here. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We've had a host of technical difficulties. Some of them are beyond our reach, but that is Bill Means. And that was him in the interview. I don't think we brought it up to show you that was him 38 years ago, 1983. This is just after Leonard Peltier had been targeted for political imprisonment, which he still suffers today on our behalf. Before we close out, I did want to give a couple more updates. We try to keep this show to an hour. Sometimes we hit that. Sometimes we go for an hour and a half. But no matter how long we go, we do want to thank you for sticking with us. It's a pretty significant audience that I do not take for granted. I'm thankful for every one of you who tune in, who like the pages, who share the content, who inform us of what you'd like to see on the show. We pay attention to all that. I'm paying attention to all of the comments in the live feed, although I cannot get to every single one of them. Whenever you put something in there that deserves to be read on the screen, I'm more than happy to do that. I do want to thank Chris Smalls. He's the brother that came on right in the beginning from the Amazon union workers struggle. Again, you can find him online. Chris Smalls, shut_down Amazon. I do want to give him credit and thank him for coming on. Andrea Carmen, I want to thank her for just coming on and giving us some of her perspective. We really, anytime we can get some of our people who've lived through these struggles, we want to give them that opportunity to be heard. In fact, Bill Means is attempting to join again. If we can get him on, I am going to give the floor to Mr. Means to talk about that video and really just to kind of give us some closing comments. Don't feel rushed at all. We can hang out for 10 more minutes easily. This audience is pretty, they've got a lot of tenacity. So thank you again. Lexi, Bill.
Uh-oh.
Oh, we cannot hear him. Hold on, let's give him a few more. I don't know if it's on our end why we can't hear him, or if it's because on his end he's not able to come on. Okay, that's about the 16th time that Lexi Bill Means has popped into my conscious periphery here, and I want to thank him for the effort. Lexi, we will have you on again. But before I leave the show tonight, I do want to do an update about Deb Holland because she has still not been confirmed. And if you remember, I don't remember the date we did the last show where Carl Artman came on and Danny Sheehan came on, and we talked about Deb Holland's historic nomination. This would be the first time in history that a Native person, let alone a Native woman, was able to hold the Secretary of the Interior post, to hold a cabinet level leadership position. This is beyond what we could have foreseen if we were alive 200 years ago. 200 years ago, we were inside the United States War Department from the colonizers' point of view. But right now, I believe it's Senator. Do you have the overlay control? There's two senators that are really giving Deb Holland problems, and one of them is Cynthia Loomis from Wyoming. And if you don't recognize that name, you might want to check it out because she's also behind this other effort to prevent Deb Holland or anybody in the Department of Interior and the National Park Service from changing the name of Devil's Tower. One of our segments a couple weeks ago was about Devil's Tower. And so we want to draw attention to that because Chuck Schumer tweeted just today that Deb Holland would be confirmed Monday. As you know, it's got to go to a full vote of the Senate. This will happen Monday. So next week, when we do cut to the chase again, we hope to have an update then. There's one more graphic that I want to control to share. If you could throw that up there, please. And that is having to do with Red Fawn. Just leave that up there, control. March 5th, just a few days ago, like 6 days ago, Red Fawn Fellis, that's who you see in the picture there. She was released from custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And as you know, she has done almost 4 years in federal prison as a political prisoner related to the Stand with Standing Rock, No DAPL struggle. It was so good to see Red Fawn free today. I had the opportunity to sit by Mini Luzaha Creek, Rapid Creek, the birthplace of Crazy Horse, and just spend some time with her and encourage her as she travels back to her home in Colorado. She's being escorted by Phyllis Young, Travis Harden. Thank you for jamming out today and sending Red Fawn back home in a good way. Chante Hart was also there today. Lexi Leonard Crowdog and Joanne, of course, and Pearl Ironshell. Everybody was here in Rapid City in the heart of the Republic of the Lakota to let Red Fawn know that we love her and that we want her to stay strong and that we appreciate her sacrifice. These people like Red Fawn, people like Michael Fasig, people like Angry Bird, Bravo One, those are what they were called at camp. Michael Marcus. These are people who have faced political imprisonment, who have done time for all of those who stood up to protect our most sacred source of drinking water here in our homeland. And I cannot thank them enough. There's nothing that will replace the time that they lost facing political imprisonment. And so I wanted to end the show by just giving her a bit of time and space as she travels on, and we want to wish her the best. We'll hopefully be able to invite her onto the show very soon. But having said all that, again, thank you to Bill Means. Bill must have tried 16 different times to come onto the show. We want to thank you, Lekshi Bill. We want to thank Andrea Carmen, Executive Director of International Indian Treaty Council, and Brother Chris Smalls for leading that fight against the world's first trillionaire. It's March 11th. It's about 6:43 Mountain Time. We're at about an hour and 15 minutes, so we're doing great. I just want to thank you for tuning in. Look for us next week. For now, this has been Cut to the Chase. Thank you all for tuning in, and we're out.